prejudiced officer confronts an innocent man in court, shocked by his true identity. The streets of Larkview City were unusually still that evening. The silence in the air made every distant noise seem amplified. Officer Ray Mitchell sat in her patrol car on the corner of Oak Street, her eyes scanning the area. She didn't have a specific reason for watching. She was simply keeping her shift routine, or so she told herself. Then she saw him, a tall man with deep brown skin, dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, strolling past a posh jewelry store. There was something about him that stood out. His walk was confident, deliberate, as if he belonged. And that was something Ray couldn't stand. She switched on her car's headlights and slowly cruised forward, stopping beside him. She leaned out the window. "Where do you live?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. The man turned slightly toward her, his eyes meeting hers calmly. "Pardon me." His tone was steady, offering no defensiveness, just an even response. Ray didn't like that. She didn't like him. "I said, where do you live?" Ray repeated, stepping out of her vehicle. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for." The man raised an eyebrow. "What description is that?" Ray straightened her posture. Tall, dark suit, walking in an area recently targeted for break-ins. The man's expression shifted, not fear, but irritation. He was unfazed. "I see. And do you have any valid reason to detain me?" His voice was still calm, but now there was a hint of challenge in it. Ray gritted her teeth. His confidence was irritating. Most people fumbled in situations like this, but not him. "Show me your ID," she ordered. He paused, not because he didn't have it, but because he knew exactly how this would play out. Before he could even reach for his pocket, Ray took a step closer. "Hands where I can see them." He sighed, clearly frustrated. "This is unnecessary." "Turn around," she barked. His body stiffened. "Are you arresting me?" "Turn around slowly." "Carefully," she commanded, as though she had done this 100 times before. He complied, and in an instant she slapped cuffs on him. But something fell off. There was no outburst, no resistance, just a quiet acceptance, as if he knew this would happen. And she was beginning to realize how right he was. At the District Court of Larkview, Officer Ray Mitchell stood in front of the judge, her uniform crisp, her stance rigid. This was routine. She had been through these proceedings countless times. Another day, another arrest, another easy case to close. But this case wasn't the same. Across the courtroom, Elijah Carter sat at the defense table, his expression composed. His hands were folded neatly in front of him, his demeanor calm. He didn't look like someone on trial, and that irritated Ray. Elijah was called to the stand, and the prosecutor, a stern man in a gray suit, nodded at her. "Officer Mitchell, could you please explain the events leading up to the arrest of Mr. Carter?" Ray cleared her throat, prepared to give her account. "I was patrolling the area at approximately 9:45 p.m. when I noticed Mr. Carter lingering near several closed shops. It was a high-end district where there had been recent reports of burglaries." The prosecutor nodded. "And what made you decide to detain him?" "I observed his behavior. He seemed to be scanning the area, possibly casing the stores." The defense attorney, a sharp woman named Claire Fields, stood and adjusted her glasses. "Officer Mitchell, do you understand the Fourth Amendment?" Ray's skin prickled. "Of course." Then, Claire continued, "You understand that in order to detain someone, there must be reasonable suspicion. Can you tell the court what Mr. Carter was doing to give you that suspicion?" Ray squared her shoulders. "He was loitering in an area with recent criminal activity." Claire's voice was measured. "Loitering? Is walking a crime?" Ray faltered. "It depends on the situation. Did you see Mr. Carter attempt to break into any shops?" Claire pressed. "Did he give any indication of criminal intent?" The courtroom fell silent. Ray struggled to answer. Claire's next question was like a weight in the room. "How many people walked down that street that night?" "I don't know. Did you stop him?" The tension in the air shifted. Ray tightened her grip on the stand, feeling the sweat on her palms. Claire turned to the judge. "Any further questions, Your Honor?" The judge nodded, and Ray's heart rate quickened. When Elijah was given permission to speak, the courtroom grew deathly quiet. "I'd like to introduce myself properly, Your Honor," Elijah said, his voice steady and clear. Ray's stomach dropped. "My name is Special Agent Elijah Carter. I'm an investigator with the Civil Rights Division of the federal government. I've been working undercover for the last 8 months, investigating racial profiling and unlawful police actions. Ray's breath caught. Elijah pulled out his badge and held it up for everyone to see. This arrest was never about me being a suspect. It was about me being a target. The room fell completely silent. The judge nodded. After reviewing the evidence submitted by Mr. Carter's team, it's clear that the arrest was not justified. Claire folded her arms and looked directly at Ray. We are requesting that all charges be dismissed immediately. Motion granted. Ray barely registered the judge's gavel hitting the desk. The worst, however, was yet to come. Elijah turned to her, his gaze piercing. Officer Mitchell, do you know why I was in that area that night? Ray felt her throat tighten. I was investigating corrupt police practices, false arrests, racial profiling, and unlawful stops. Her heart pounded in her chest. I went out there alone, following a lead, and within minutes, I was detained by you. The room was still as death. The judge's gaze shifted to Ray. Officer Mitchell, the Department of Justice will be conducting a full review of your cases and your department's conduct. Ray's world started to crumble. Every report, every arrest, everything she had done as an officer would now be under investigation. Elijah's voice cut through the tension. How many others, Officer Mitchell? Ray froze, unable to answer. How many people have you treated this way? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The silence was deafening. For years, Ray had believed she was in control, that she could decide who belonged and who didn't. But today, she realized she was no longer in control. Today, the tables had turned. Today, she was the one being questioned. Today, she was the problem. As the courtroom buzzed with murmurs, Ray Mitchell felt a weight she had never known before. For years, she had worn the badge with pride, believing that her role was clear, her actions justified. She had been the authority, the enforcer of order. But today, as the reality of her actions sank in, that perception shattered like glass. Every decision, every arrest, every justification she had ever made now seemed questionable under the harsh light of scrutiny. The weight of the truth was suffocating, and for the first time, Ray felt completely powerless. She had always believed that control was hers to wield. Control over the streets, over the people she interacted with, over how situations played out. But Elijah Carter, standing before her now with unwavering composure, had peeled back the layers of her carefully constructed world. His calm, deliberate demeanor had stripped away the illusion of authority she had clung to. She realized then that his arrest wasn't about him at all. It was about the system that had allowed her, and others like her, to abuse power without consequence. She had been the one who had failed to see the truth, who had turned a blind eye to the very thing she was sworn to protect. The Department of Justice's review wasn't just about her. It exposed a deeper, systemic issue that had been ignored for too long. Elijah's investigation into racial profiling and corruption was only the beginning. Ray was just one officer, part of a much larger problem, and the consequences of her actions reached far beyond her career, affecting many others who had suffered from injustice. Her heart raced as the realization hit. Her world was falling apart. The system she had sworn to protect was now holding her accountable. There was no escaping the consequences. Her life, career, and future would never be the same. In that moment, Ray understood the true cost of power and the dangers of unchecked authority. Elijah's question echoed in her mind. How many others? It haunted her because she knew the answer. How many times had she judged based on assumptions, acted on biases, and ignored the humanity of those she encountered? As she left the courtroom, Ray didn't feel like an officer anymore. She was just a woman facing the consequences of her actions. There was no more hiding behind the badge. The truth had finally caught up with her, and in that moment, she understood what it meant to be truly accountable. It was a hard lesson, but perhaps it was the one thing that could lead to real change.